Stand on the freezing cobblestone docks of Amsterdam in the year 1600 and you will smell salt, wet timber, and absolute terror. A merchant stands at the edge of the water, staring out at the gray horizon. He is shivering, but not from the cold. He has just taken his entire family fortune, everything his ancestors built, and dumped it into the belly of a single, creaking wooden ship. He is sending that ship half a world away, into an unmapped void, to chase a ghost. At this exact moment in history, a handful of dried nutmeg from the volcanic islands of the Pacific can buy a house in Europe. Spices are not just flavor, they are a cure for diseases. They are the ultimate, untouchable luxury. The profit margins are so astronomical, they defy reason. But the friction of reality is brutal. The ocean is a meat grinder. To reach those spices, this merchant ship must survive a year-long voyage down the boiling coast of Africa, through the freezing tempests of the Cape, and across the hostile Indian Ocean. It must survive pirates, typhoons, and the slow, rotting death of scurvy that turns a crew to walking corpses. 50% of the ships that leave this dock will never return. They will vanish into the dark water, taking every ounce of silver and every human life with them. This is a binary gamble. If the ship comes back, the merchant becomes a lord. But if the wind turns against it, or a reef tears the hull open in the blackness of night, the merchant is instantly bankrupted. His family is ruined forever. The physical risk is a crushing, unbearable weight. It is a financial system built entirely on the unpredictable violence of the sea. But the merchant on the dock is tired of betting his life on the weather. The risk has become too heavy. Therefore, humanity is about to do something terrifying. They are going to conquer the ocean by inventing a completely new kind of math. Out in the deep water, ships are shattering against hidden rocks, and desperate men are drowning in the dark. But inside a quiet, warm brick courtyard in Amsterdam, there is no storm. There is no blood. There is only the gentle scratch of a quill on a thick, leather-bound ledger. In 1602, the Dutch realized that they cannot build a stronger ship. They cannot control the typhoons, but they can control the numbers. They forge a new weapon called the Verenigde Oostindische Compagnie, the Dutch East India Company. The stroke of genius is brilliantly simple. They take the terrifying, crushing physical reality of that wooden ship, and they slice it into thousands of invisible pieces. They open a book in a courtyard and invite anyone, a wealthy aristocrat, a blacksmith, a maid, to drop a few silver coins on the table and buy a tiny fraction of the voyage. They invent the joint stock corporation. They invent the stock market. Suddenly, the agony of the merchant's gamble is gone. If a ship sinks off the coast of Africa now, it is no longer a catastrophe that destroys a family. It is just a minor subtraction in a massive ledger. The loss is spread out across thousands of people. The ocean has been mathematically neutralized. Risk is no longer a death sentence. It is a calculated, manageable cost of doing business. This abstract idea changes the world overnight. Because the risk is gone, a tidal wave of silver floods into Amsterdam. The citizens are no longer funding a single desperate ship. They are funding fleets, dozens, then hundreds of heavily armed galleons, entirely paid for by the collective wealth of a nation, built on the weightless promise of a piece of paper. The paper shares themselves become more valuable than the spices. Men gather in the alleys of Amsterdam, frantically buying and selling these pieces of parchment, betting on the arrival of ships they will never see, captained by men they will never meet. The stock market becomes a massive beating heart of capital, pumping unimaginable wealth into the company. But this abstraction is about to mutate. The math works entirely too well. The money piles up so high, and the demands of the shareholders become so fierce, that the company undergoes a terrifying transformation. The quiet, clean numbers on the Amsterdam ledger cross the ocean and become the deafening roar of bronze cannons. The Dutch government looks at this massive, wealthy corporate machine and gives it a charter that fundamentally alters the earth. They give the company the power of a king. The VOC is granted the legal right to mint its own currency, hire its own private armies, build stone fortresses, and negotiate treaties with foreign nations. They are no longer a merchant fleet. They are a sovereign empire powered by shareholders, and they have one absolute directive: secure the dividend. When the heavily armed fleets of the VOC arrive in the Pacific, they do not come to trade, they come to dominate. The executives in Amsterdam realize that the most efficient way to guarantee a high stock price is not to compete in a free market. It is to enforce an absolute, violent monopoly. Look at the Banda Islands, the only place on Earth where the precious nutmeg grows. When the local population refuses to give the VOC exclusive trading rights, the company does not negotiate. Under the command of Jan Pieterszoon Cohen, the company unleashes a corporate army. They slaughter the islanders. They burn the villages to ash. They enslave the survivors and bring in their own workers to harvest the crop. They don't stop there. If they find nutmeg growing on an island they do not directly control, they chop the trees down and burn the soil. They artificially choke the global supply of food to keep the prices in Europe astronomically high. This is where the ledger drips with blood. The clean, crisp payouts being handed to the wealthy bakers and aristocrats in Amsterdam are directly funded by the ashes of the Banda Islands. The stock price ticks upward every time a rival plantation is burned to the ground. The company has taken the brilliant, abstract math of shared risk and weaponized it into a global machine of brute force. At its peak, the VOC employs 70,000 people, commands a private navy, and controls half of the total trade on the planet. They are the most valuable entity to ever exist, but you cannot outrun the physical world forever. You can abstract risk. You can slice up a ship into 1,000 pieces of paper, but you can never abstract the rot. Deep in the sweltering jungles of the Pacific, the invincible corporate machine begins to rust. The distances are simply too vast. It takes over a year for a message to travel from the boardrooms of Amsterdam to the governor in Asia. In that massive void of time, corruption breeds like a virus. The employees of the VOC realize they are fighting and dying in the mud to make rich men in Europe even richer. So they stop working for the company. The captains, the merchants, the soldiers, they all begin trading for themselves in secret. They load the VOC ships with their own private cargo, pocketing the silver while letting the company's fortresses crumble. The greatest monopoly in history is eaten alive from the inside by its own workers. Back in Amsterdam, the ledgers turn red. The company is bleeding cash, but they are terrified of the shareholders. If they stop paying the dividend, the stock market will crash. So, the company does what failing empires always do. They take on massive, crushing debt just to keep up the illusion of profitability. They borrow mountains of gold simply to pay out the angry crowds in the courtyard, covering up the fact that their ships are rotting in the Pacific. The massive, heavy reality of the wooden ships finally crushes the delicate paper math. In 1799, drowning in debt, hollowed out by corruption, and outgunned by the rising British Empire, the Dutch East India Company collapses. The first mega-corporation in human history goes utterly bankrupt. The bloated, sinking hulls of the VOC ships dissolve into the mud of the ocean floor. But the invisible machine they built never stops running. It only gets faster. The VOC died, but they permanently rewired the human race. They proved that you could take the terrifying, chaotic violence of the physical world and lock it inside a mathematical equation. They proved that a collective group of strangers could pool their money, share their risk, and build a force powerful enough to conquer continents. Look at the world today. The heavy leather ledgers of Amsterdam have entirely dissolved into abstract digital geometry. In cold, windowless data centers, rack after rack of servers blink in total silence, processing millions of transactions a second. We don't trade on wooden docks anymore. We trade through fiber optic cables buried under the ocean, moving trillions of dollars at the speed of light. But the architecture is exactly the same. The modern stock market, the multinational megacorporation, the ruthless, never-ending pursuit of the quarterly return. Every single piece of our modern global economy is the direct descendant of that freezing dock in 1600. We have conquered the agony of distance. We have replaced the wind with the microchip. But we are still playing the exact same game forged by the Dutch over 400 years ago. They dragged the violence of the world into a ledger, and the world never escaped it.